Hi, this is Tom at DYRPG, illustrator, adventurer, and consumer of all things pop culture. And today I'm going to be showing you a process video for a Chibi Marvel Zombie She-Hulk. Wow, that's a mouthful. I'll be using Clip Studio, which is my favorite software for illustration. One of the reasons I love it is because it has a lot of 3D models. Pictured here in the Clip Studio Assets store, you can find all sorts of models. Just type what you're looking for into the search bar and you'll find all sorts of cool things to download. In this example, I'm looking for Chibi Models. Here's the Chibi model that I use to do all my Chibi characters. And I've done all kinds of things with this model. I've done big muscular figures, more feminine figures, really anything. And I'm going to talk more about using models later, but next, I want to show you one of the other really cool things you can do with Clip Studio. Another great thing about Clip Studio is the customizable wireless controller you can buy for it called the TabMate, pictured here. It has many different buttons and it has a scrolling wheel. I use the scrolling wheel for zooming in or out or increasing and decreasing brush size. It also has many buttons and I use them to select my favorite brushes and for undoing and redoing recent actions. I've been using it for about a year now and I could not live without it. It has sped up my process so much. Okay, so now we're back at the Chibi model. And a little advice on 3D models, don't rely on them too much. If you really want to improve as an artist, it always helps to take gestural drawing classes and work off of real-life models to learn human anatomy. I can't recommend it enough. So at this point you might be asking me, why do I use 3D models at all? Here's my take on that. Instead of creating thumbnail sketches of a bunch of separate poses, I like to use 3D models so I can see how I respond to the different poses and then just dive right in and start sketching. Yeah, so again, after that initial rough sketch, you can start fleshing out your character, adding body weight or muscle, and making the implied movement of the character more dynamic. You're just not going to get that movement drawing directly over a model. So yeah, after your first sketch, get rid of it. Just turn off that layer. And I'm going to be doing several Chibi Marvel zombies, and again, I'm going to be using the same model as a base. So two main things stand out when you're doing Chibi, besides the proportions. I mean, everyone knows the really big heads and the little bodies. Aside from the proportions, those two things are the eyes and the hair. So I love drawing eyes. I've spent so many hours drawing anime eyes and spent a lot of time online just looking at anime eyes, looking at diagrams of different kinds of eyes. You know, crazy eyes, sad eyes, watery eyes, just so many different kinds. So yeah, often when I start drawing a character, that's where I start with the eyes. Eyes are one of the most expressive features of the human face. They reveal the emotion of the character and can help determine the overall mood of the picture. So they're extremely important. So the next thing I'm going to start working on, as I'm moving into my second sketch here, going over my first sketch, is her hair. I mean, as I said, that's one of the other things when doing Chibi or doing anime. The hair is always a big focal point. And I love, as much as I love drawing eyes, I might like drawing hair even better. Next, I'm going to be making some creepy zombie teeth using something that I like to call my Subtractive Technique. So what I've done is I've laid down some black, and then I'm going to use that transparent box to start carving away at that black area. What's really great about the transparent box is that you can use it with any brush tool. I almost never use the actual eraser tool because the effects you can get using the transparent box and different brushes in a lot of cases is so much better. For example, you could use a G-pen style brush to make some hatching and cross-hatching patterns, or you could achieve softer value transitions using an airbrush. Later in the video, I'll be showing you different examples of my subtractive technique, but just to review, you start by laying down a large area of color, and then use the transparency with any brush to carve into that block of color. It'll make more sense, I promise, once it comes up again. So I'm drawing her shoes here. Jennifer Walters has these they almost look like Velcro pumps. They're really fun. And zombies probably aren't that good at tying their shoes, so Velcro is probably a good move for a zombie. So as I'm sketching, I'm looking for areas of improvement, I guess, things to create some interest. So it just occurred to me, why not throw in a band-aid with some blood coming out? That might be a feature that is kind of fun to look at. And that's my suggestion, is as you're working, adding in details, working over, your previous sketch, how can I make this really the best it can be? How can it make it more fun, more dynamic? Dynamic is a word that I like to use a lot. Give it energy. So the costume that I'm drawing here is one of She-Hulk's most recent costumes, or I don't know how recent it is, but it's one of her newer costumes. She used to have her Fantastic Four costume, which was one of my favorites, the blue and white one. But this one is the white and purple one, so I think you all will recognize it once I start adding color. What you see here is I decided that the pose that I had chosen during the 3D model stage looked like a running pose, and I really didn't like that. Because when I was thinking about zombies, I was thinking of your George Romero type Night of the Living Dead zombie. And having a running zombie, that's something, it's more like 28 Days Later. Not a true zombie, somebody that's infected with a virus. Oh, okay, so that big red thing that you just saw, what I was doing was I was dragging. I created a new window, and then I dragged it onto one of my other screens. I have 3 screens that I'm working on. Not everybody needs 3. I like to have reference material on one screen, a second window on another screen, and then I'm drawing on my Cintiq using that main screen. What you're seeing now, that's what you're looking at. But it's always good to have, if you can, to have a separate screen to be able to put another live window there. So as you're sketching, if you're zooming in, as I'm doing now, I can glance over at that other screen and see the full image. It's really handy. So again, getting back to that other leg with the little foot there, it looked like she was running, and I wanted to have the more stumbling, staggering zombie look. So I was like, yeah, I'm going to switch that up. There I go, adding a little bit more muscle. So I'd like to say that the sketching process for me, I probably go through two refining sketches before I have my final layer. I usually have one really rough, and then I make some small improvements with the second. And then generally what I do is I move into my third layer knowing that it's going to be my final layer. It really depends. Sometimes I end up doing yet another layer depending on how I feel about it. So that big X for an eye was something that I don't know where the inspiration came from, that, or came in for that. I just thought it might look funny to indicate, oh, she's dead. That's why she has a big X for an eye. So again, I'm going to use the subtractive technique to put in the little Velcro straps of her shoe. When doing that subtractive technique, what I find is sometimes it adds a three-dimensionality to the object that I'm working on. I can think of the way that light is hitting the object, and depending on how the white contrasts with the black, it can change the overall shape of the object that I'm working on. Again, I'm using that subtractive technique there to add some value, carve into the black shaded areas to soften the transition there. And it's time to work on that hair a little bit more. Her hair seems to get bigger every time I add a layer to the sketch. And Jennifer Walters, I mean, She-Hulk, you think of muscle, but you also, I don't know, maybe it's just me, I think of her incredible hair. I mean, her hair is that dark green, but it's really nice. I mean, looks like Jennifer visits the salons now and then. I mean, she's got some really nice movie star like quality hair. But of course, as a zombie, not so much. So I'm trying to achieve a balance here between hair that looks a little bit disheveled, but also, you know, is reminiscent of Jennifer Walters. Just really impressive hair. So I'm playing around a bit. As I said, her hair just keeps on getting bigger and bigger. It's almost like she just rolled out of bed. She is looking a little bit creepy. Her hair kind of reminds me of Elvira or Bride of Frankenstein. Last year I did several pieces on Instagram where I was choosing my favorite horror films, because I'm a huge horror film nut. I'm a lifetime lover of horror. I started collecting Fangoria magazine when I was in my teens and never turned back, never looked back. So yeah, last year on Instagram I did little chibi versions of characters from my favorite films. Bride of Frankenstein was one of them. As I move into my final line layer, I'm going to be showing you one of the things I like to do, and that is to change the layer color. So normally, of course, when you're drawing in pen, the default is often black. When you open the program, it's going to be black and white, the palette colors. But when doing the final line layer, I often find that black is just kind of boring. So I'll change the color to a dark brown often if I want a kind of softer look. But in this case, I've chosen a dark green, which seemed appropriate for She-Hulk. And I've dropped my opacity down pretty far, so it's difficult to see, but the other layer is below. And I've done most of the work ahead of time, so my final layer, I'm going to be just refining, as I said, trying to make improvements. But you can see that I'm making decisions even in this last version of the line layer before I move into color. So if you make a really nice and clean final draft layer or sketch layer, when you're working in what I like to call the ink layer, when we were working, well, let's just say when I used to work in traditional mediums, it would be ink, but I'm working digitally, so it's not, but I still in my mind think of it as my ink layer, so I'll often name the layer my ink layer. So when I say ink layer, what I mean is my final line layer. But when I have my sketch layer, my final sketch layer is really clean, my hope is that when I move into that ink layer, again, in quotes, I can be really confident in the lines that I'm putting down because I know where they're going to go. And so I can be really broad and gestural in the strokes, the lines that I'm laying down. And the more confident one is, the better. When you can make those lines that are, swooping, or it's hard to put into words, but one knows it when they sees it. I don't know. Yeah, I'll just say that. Yeah, that tab mate, I'm telling you again, comes in so handy when I'm holding it and I can just tap a button, and then if I don't like the stroke that I just put down, undo it, redo it. I can work really rapidly using something like that, instead of reaching over for the keyboard to hit Command Z all the time. So let's talk about zombies, why not, while I'm working. Earlier I mentioned Romero's Night of the Living Dead, which is of course a classic zombie movie. But it's kind of interesting because there have been so many different kinds of zombies, and when I was young, the transmission or creation of zombies was something that, I guess I should say it's still interesting to me now. Because there's different kinds of zombies. There's your viral zombies, which, I mentioned 28 Days Later. So there's the zombies that become infected by, getting bitten by another zombie. This is in Romero's films, the famous Dawn of the Living Dead. One of the characters gets bitten and infected, and he's lying in a bed, and he slowly rises out of the bed, and that he's been turned. It's a really good scene. That's another scene that I illustrated last year as one of my chibi scenes. Another kind of zombie is the zombie that arises from people's fears of new technology. One of the theories that's thrown out in Romero's Night of the Living Dead is a satellite transmission that maybe satellites were something that were kind of new to people in the 1960s, and so the idea that there would be these transmissions coming from these things that are floating in our upper atmosphere or in space that could have, terrible effects on us, which is kind of interesting because people are really afraid right now about, 5G and what 5G networks are going to do to our brains, potentially. So yeah, there's new technology. There's the viral route. Another variation is the toxic waste zombies, which is something that was, fear of toxic waste was a thing that was really big in the 1980s. And so there was the movie Return of the Living Dead, which featured this kind of toxic military industrial waste. And there were canisters full of this gross, whatever it is, this poison that gets released and it turns people into zombies. And of course there's the undead zombies, which is that might be kind of my favorite category, is like coming out of dark fantasy fiction. They're not exactly wizards or zombies, but liches, for example. They're an example of, the undead category. And zombies are low on the totem pole. They're kind of like servants of these dark sorcerers or, beings like that. So there's a lot of different kind of zombies. I mean, there's, of course, Marvel zombies, which are zombies that are, were once superheroes, but now require human flesh, or at least they like eating human flesh. It's actually been a while since I read the comics. Gasp, I probably have to go back and read those. It's the perfect time to do that. It's getting close to Halloween, so as I record this, so I should really revisit those comics. They were really great. Oh, and of course, how could I forget to mention the biblical version of a zombie? Or again, this is maybe not exactly zombies, but I think of stories in which, there's a world where zombies exist and characters will talk about the end of days. It's the time, it's Revelations, which is always funny because it's a kind of explanation for why people are turning into zombies, which is really no explanation. It's something that's often thrown out as a kind of just throwaway answer. It's the end of days, it's the end of the world, so people are reanimating. I don't know. So yeah, if any of you watching this video have another example of a kind of a zombie, please let me know. Put it in the comments, because I do like zombie movies and fiction, comics. It's all good. I've been liking zombies for a long time, and they seem to go in and out of fashion, but they're also something that I just really can't grow completely weary of, as you see. I mean, I'm still drawing them. So I decided here to do a kind of silhouette technique. Just fill in black. I also changed her hands a little bit. Her fingers, she had been clenching her fists, kind of like she was going to punch something. But I didn't really like that, because again, I'm going for a kind of Night of the Living Dead zombie, so I thought having her hands kind of clenching, grasping, you can just imagine her lunging forward and reaching out for you. So I decided to change that a little bit. And here I decided that she should lose an arm, kind of for dramatic effect. When I put it on the first time, it's pretty funny. It looks like she's going to plug her arm into a wall socket or something. I was attempting to, draw some bones in there, but it looks pretty silly. So I end up modifying that a little bit so that it doesn't look so weird. There's something kind of comedic about it, the way it was, but I do fix it. It looks a lot better. Although now it almost looks like a pirate hook for an hand, but adding the big drop of blood kind of draws one's attention, especially when I move into color. Because blood is red, and anytime you have red in an illustration, it's going to draw one's attention. So I think now when you see the drawing, this ink layer, you can really see how different this final version of the character is from that Chibi model that I used. So use 3D models. I mean, Clip Studio is an excellent resource. I have made my own versions of, I've modified 3D models that I've found online. And there's so many different kinds. They're really cool. They're animal models. There's environments like bedrooms, backgrounds, things like that. All those teeth are really looking bad. Bad, good, I'm not sure. Now she looks like a rabbit. I almost wish I kept those. I just love drawing icky teeth so much. It's like I almost, just want to keep on working on those. I wanted to draw a zipper here, but I decided that was way too distracting. Here I ended up drawing something that was really funny. It reminded me of a xenomorph, almost as if she had this extendable jaw that was, popping out. You'll see in the final version of this illustration that I decided not to do the teeth at all. One thing about She-Hulk is that she has these dark green lips, and Her lips are one of her real defining features. And so the idea that she would have these, that I would try to work in the teeth with her lips, I thought that it was too much detail, or that the detail of her lips or with the teeth would be distracting. And so I ended up deciding that it would be funny to have these somewhat glamorous lips, even though her expression is kind of strange. Like her bottom lip's kind of off to the side a little bit. But the contrast of having the lipstick with this blood spatter around her mouth, I thought was kind of a fun detail. So I ended up losing the teeth altogether, even though I spent time doing several iterations of that, and then just deciding it didn't work. She-Hulk's body, I thought, was kind of longer than I wanted her to be. And my thought was that if I reshape, and transform her body shape, that it would accentuate her muscle, her leg muscle. In a sense, she looks plumper, but it really brings her, her leg muscles out. Which is good, because again, her strength is one of her defining features. That leg that's posed up a little bit, I can tell that I abstracted it a little bit in the final layer. It reminds me of the work of Bruce Timm, who's one of my favorite illustrators. He did the character design for Batman the Animated Series and a lot of the series that followed that. The Justice League, Superman Adventures, Batman Beyond, I believe he also did. But he drew in this very abstracted, cartoony style. And his shapes were excellent. And if you want to be really good at cartoon style illustration, whether it's Western style or anime style, being able to understand basic shapes, circles, rectangles, triangles. Most characters are an assemblage of very basic large shapes, and it's really pleasing to the eye. For whatever reason, we're drawn to these big bold shapes. So here I was in the final ink layer, and I decided that she just lost an arm, and that here's her hand kind of stretched out in a pool of blood. I make a little heart-shaped drop of blood coming out of this little puddle. Don't be afraid to experiment. And as I said before, always be thinking about how can I improve this drawing? What can I do to make it more fun, more interesting? And go for it. Nobody's holding you back. So I was liking the way this is looking. I wasn't sure, honestly, what to do about this X for an eye, because I knew that moving into color, I was going to have to justify what is this strange abstract shape? What's going on with it? And so I decided that it was this still abstract, but a representation of this underlayer, this muscle tissue. And so I drew this kind of skin that was cut away from the muscle tissue. I'm getting very near moving into my color layer. And again, working in an anime style or chibi style. Hair highlights are such a big deal. I can't emphasize how much of a big deal they are. So what I often like to do when drawing highlights is I will create a separate layer and then mark them out. And you have to be careful when you're making out basically color blocking. I'm making lines that indicate where I'm going to drop in using the paint bucket tool. I'm going to drop in that color. So you want to make sure that you close up your shapes as you're drawing them. But yeah, I draw the hair highlights on a separate layer often and then delete it after I have my color down, because I don't like for there to be lines around the highlights. So earlier I had experimented with changing her body shape, but I wanted to draw the final ink layer before making those changes. One thing that I didn't mention before about Clip Studio, but I'll mention it now, is that you can draw using vector technology, which is different than pixel-based technology. Vector is really clean, and it keeps its integrity when you resize your image. I could take this drawing that I've made because I worked in using a vector layer. I could blow her up really big and it wouldn't become pixelated. So that's one thing to think about. Vector usually increases the size of the image that you're working on, the file size. So sometimes I will draw my sketch layers using, a normal pixel-based layer. But then once I move into my ink layer, I'll switch it to a vector, just in case I decide to resize it. When I resize it, I want it to look really clean and nice. So there we have it. I'm moving into color. I have my ink layer. And my first set of colors I'm going to lay down, I set my layer property to multiply. And the paint bucket tool is going to fill in those areas that are closed in. So I'm just using that paint bucket tool to drop in what some people refer to as your flats. It's your base colors that you're going to be working from. So this is an example of where I obviously had a gap somewhere. And when you have a gap, it'll fill your entire canvas. I'm sure this has never happened to you. Yeah, it's really annoying when that happens. So you can see that because I had drawn those highlights ahead of time, that those areas are not filled. So I go ahead and fill them in. And ultimately I'm going to add more highlights. But I just want to have an idea of where to start. When you use the paint bucket tool to close in, to block out areas, what you'll find is that, especially if you zoom into your image, you're going to see that there are little gaps between where you lay down your color and the line that you created in your ink layer. And so I usually go over with the paintbrush those large areas to make sure that I close in those little gaps. So because this is a multiply layer, I can go over my line work, and then it's going to almost like create a burning effect where it's going to darken the lines when you place colors over them. So you can see where I made her angry eyebrow. I put a dark green over it and it almost becomes black. But it really brings out that eyebrow. One thing about eyeballs is that they're not perfectly white. And so usually I will add a color like cream, and like you see here, a little bit of red, or like a very faint tint of pink. And it gives the eye a kind of dimensionality. I'm using a concept brush that is kind of soft, and it gives the color that I'm laying down, it's more of a painterly effect. So you may be able to see that I added in a new layer above my color layer, which I set to multiply. And this new layer, which is set above the multiply layer, is set to normal. It's just a normal layer. And because it's set to normal, the colors that I lay down are going to be, unless I change the opacity, they're actually going to obscure the line work if I go over the line work. And they're going to go right over the other colors, but they're not going to blend with them in the same way if it was set to multiply. And I like to do that because I use that normal layer as a kind of highlight layer to show where light is hitting the object. In this case, it's Jennifer's hair. If you go ahead and look at a photograph of somebody standing on a beach maybe, and there's a lot of sunlight, you'll often see there's almost like a halo effect around their hair. Where it gets really bright. And that's why I like to add that normal layer with the highlights. Because it adds a kind of almost like real world lighting effect. Where some of those lines that I drew, they are going to get obscured, but it's going to make the overall effect of the illustration, give it a little bit of a feeling of realism. So you can see that as I add more color to those highlight areas that I marked out, I'm varying the shape. I'm not sticking to the actual shapes that I drew in that other layer. I can go kind of wild sometimes with highlights. I feel like I'm never sure how much is too much. You know, I have a philosophy of kind of maximum, minimum, or you know, just kind of go full force with something, and then what, you know, if it looks too ridiculous or too extra, just pull back a little bit. But I feel like it's better to have that attitude of, you know, diving right in than being too hesitant. And honestly, having that attitude is something that has been afforded to me by working digitally for so many years now. When you're worried that laying down an extra wash, if you're working in watercolor, you know, that it might ruin your painting, that's really intimidating. There's no walking back certain mistakes. When I used to work traditionally in pen and ink, I always, you know, dreaded worrying about my ink nib suddenly sputtering, you know, a bit of ink out of it. There'd be, you know, you'd hit the paper the wrong way, and all of a sudden there'd be little ink splatters that would just go out all over your work, and then you'd have to go back with whiteout. So, you know, I talk about being confident, but some of that confidence is afforded to me because I'm working digitally, and Command Z, I mean, it's your friend. You can undo, take advantage of it. So I mentioned a photograph before of somebody standing on a beach. Even when you're doing really abstracted cartoon type figures, it's good to familiarize yourself with real world kind of lighting effects. And so using photographic reference, even for something like this, is really helpful. It's going to improve your work the more you, especially working in color, start paying attention to the world around you. It helps even when you're going for a walk, you know, depending on what time of day it is and the kind of sunlight that you're experiencing. Pay attention to how that changes the colors that you see. Or if it's a texture, how does light reflect off of metallic surfaces? How does light reflect off of softer surfaces like textiles, like clothing? Really start trying to pay attention to those things. And that's not to say that you have to always be representing, you know, what you're drawing appropriately, especially if it's something abstracted like this. Like I decided for her nose that it should be a really like bright highlight. And the way that light hits skin, unless it's wet, often the light diffuses, it spreads out. But this is a cartoon drawing, so I decide to give her some really bright highlights. and to not diffuse it very much. But it's great to have choices if you know what your choices are. I drew some lines on that X'd out area in her face, wanting to kind of allude to the fibers of muscle tissue. But I decided that they were too much. So I ended up going over that. As I'm moving into the final stages of the color layer, and ultimately drawing, or rather painting, the final touches. That punched in eye or whatever it was not working. I got distracted. Moving into the final stages of this illustration, just wanted to say that if you have ideas for me to do any other Chibi Marvel characters, please let me know. I'm going to be doing a couple more of these, as I said, in the month of October 2020. My God, what a year it's been. Yeah, but I won't talk about that. If you're wanting to see something fun or experience something fun, you have a favorite superhero you're thinking of, a favorite Marvel superhero. Not that I don't like DC. I do prefer Marvel, I'm just going to admit it, I'm sorry. But that's neither here nor there. Because I'm doing a Marvel Zombie series, if you have a Marvel character that you're thinking of, let me know and maybe I'll be able to do it before Halloween. This idea for She-Hulk came from my daughter, who also loves to draw. I asked her, what kind of Marvel zombie character should I do? And her suggestion was She-Hulk. And I was immediately excited because She-Hulk is one of my favorite characters anyway. And her color scheme is one of my favorite color schemes. Green and purple, they just go together so well. You know, I think of the Joker as also, you know, also has those colors working for him. So yeah, if you have an idea, if you're an X-Men fan, if you're an Avengers fan, you have a deep cut suggestion like Howard the Duck, let me know. And if I have time, I'll do it even after Halloween's over. I might do it because really, to me, it's Halloween all year long. Like I said, I'm a horror fan, so the spooky, scary stuff, it's good in December. It's good anytime. The color dropper tool is my friend, especially when I'm using a concept brush. Like I said, using a brush that, you know, when I lay it down, it's going to blend with the colors under it, like I was working in acrylic or oil. What I'll often do is take a color that I want to use, for example, maybe red, and then I'll just brush it over the green, and then I'll use the color dropper tool to get that color, whatever it is, in between red and green. And then I'll switch my brush tool to that color. Because there's a story being told with these colors throughout the image. The way that they connect with one another, it's pleasing to the eye. Or at least I like to think it is. That drop of blood almost looks like a candy color. It's so bright and vibrant. I provided my Instagram handle at the beginning of this video. thom.dyrpg. So if you like what I'm doing, you can go to Instagram and see more of my work. And if you like what you see, you can follow me, you can DM me. I like to see what people are doing. And I like to hear from people, so don't hesitate to reach out. I also have a website, DYRPG.com, and you can see more of my work there. DYRPG stands for Do You RPG, which is a kind of funny construction, but it really is posing the question, do you play role-playing games? And not everybody has to play role-playing games, obviously. But those that do, you know who you are. And you would also know one of the greatest, or at least to me, one of the greatest things about playing role-playing games is embodying a different character, one that you create yourself. And I've been playing role-playing games for a really long time, since I was a teenager, which was a little bit of time ago. And I loved to make illustrations for my characters, or draw, even just a portrait, like a headshot of my character. It would help me in the way that I played the characters. If I could picture the characters in my mind, it gave me a much better understanding, if you will, of like who this character was. What kind of person were they, or creature. I once played a goblin as a character, which was really fun. But so my website is all about supporting gamers out there that want help in fleshing out their characters or envisioning their characters. So I have information online on how to contact me if you want a character illustration. And it doesn't have to be related to playing role-playing games. It can be whatever, it can be fan art. But being a gamer myself, I can't help myself. I like to support people who like to play role-playing games, or at least grow consciousness about playing role-playing games. Now, I don't know how we got this far in the video without me mentioning that you should be saving very often. I have my program set to autosave every half an hour. But it's happened to me where my computer has just randomly shut down and I've lost hours of work. That has happened before. It was very sad. Although what I would say about that is, if you ever make a terrible, irreversible mistake, at least you have the knowledge that if you've done it once before, you can do it again. So when I was working on something, an illustration, I had lost like 3 hours worth of work. And I had to take a deep breath and then just say to myself, you know what, I put in the work, before I can probably even do it faster a second time. So it's still time lost, but it's not the end of the world. But to prevent that happening, which is what I started talking about, is to save often. So you see now I'm using that normal setting, topmost layer, to lay down some of those highlights around the skin by her eye, by the X eye. And that's adding a kind of dimensionality there where you can see, or your mind reads, that the flesh is kind of popping out over this area of muscle tissue or pink, whatever it is. She stepped in some blood. Might be her own blood. Might be somebody else's blood. We don't know. One thing I do know for sure is I wouldn't want to mess with her. She looks like she's not had the best day. Oh, I made that same mistake again. I didn't close in my line layer. That's okay. There are a lot of incredible brush packs for Clip Studio Paint. One of my favorite illustrators, the one with Bear. She's known online as the one with Bear. She made a really cool Sumie brush pack that has some dry brushes in it. Japanese style sumie, and they're good for all sorts of things. Doing traditional Japanese type painting or like a manga-esque illustration. And another illustrator who has made brushes I really love is Frenden. Frenden, Frenden. Shout out, because I have gotten many of your brush packs, Frenden, over the years. So if you're out there, thank you. The one with Bear, thank you. But that's one of the many joys of using Clip Studio is the support, the community support over the years of people making incredible resources for this software. And being somebody that just likes to play with new toys, I have more brushes than I really need. Many more, but it's always fun to experiment with new ones. So when you're doing highlights and also doing shading in color, never use well, I shouldn't say never. I mean, do whatever you want. And there are going to be times when you really want to do a bright highlight and you're going to want to use white. Or a shadow if you're doing an ink style drawing where you want black. There are definitely some colors in my illustrations that are approaching black, but generally you want to stay away from black and white when working in color. Think about what tones you're creating through your color choices. Are you working with cool colors? Are you working with warm colors? I'm using purple to do a lot of the shading in her hair, because it's a nice cool color, and it's also, of course, tying into her costume, the purple in her costume. Well, I'm getting close to being done. So for those of you that have watched this video for this full length of time, or even if you are fast forwarding and are hearing my voice now, thank you so much for watching this video. And I'm really happy to share my illustration with you, and if you're gaining any kind of knowledge or learning of new techniques through watching this video, it makes me really happy to be able to share that with you. She's got a little blood dripping down. It looks pretty bad. She's gonna need a little bit of help with that. So I'm working on a 22-inch HD Cintiq. If you can afford one, it is excellent. I've been using a Cintiq. I had a different one before this new one, but I've been using a Cintiq for years, and I absolutely love it. I also have an iPad Pro, which is good in a pinch, or I'm heading to a cafe. I like doing color on the iPad Pro for sure. It's really fun. And Clip Studio does have a version of Clip Studio Paint for iPad. And it's well worth it. It has all the same features, and you can upload your files to the cloud, and then from your desktop work on the same files. You can go back and forth between your iPad and your desktop or laptop. And so I have a subscription to the iPad Clip Studio, and I have the desktop version. There's a lot of really excellent transformation tools in Clip Studio. I also used Photoshop for a really long time, for years actually, and I learned a lot of my digital painting in Photoshop. There was a time when Clip Studio was not as powerful. It was a piece of software not as powerful as Adobe's Photoshop. But I think it's at a point now where it's really competitive and has some features that Photoshop doesn't. But if any of you out there are Photoshop users and have never tried Clip Studio, I would highly suggest that you download a free version and take it for a spin. And as I mentioned and showed you earlier, the assets feature, where you can download 3D models and brushes and patterns. It's such an incredible resource. Going back to zombie teeth, the character that I'm going to work on next is going to be Venom. And I can't think of a better character in terms of having fun with teeth. Venom is the top of the list. The one that just comes to mind right away, just jumps right out. Teeth and tongue. When I think about Venom, that's what I think of. And so I'm extremely excited to be starting very soon on Chibi Marvel Venom. Or rather, Chibi Marvel zombie venom. Gotta get all the words in there. Gotta get the swoop on. Gonna give her some more swoopy bits to her hair. So I mentioned earlier, if y'all have any ideas about different kinds of zombies, different ways one becomes a zombie, methods of transmission would be one way to put it. If you have ideas, let me know. If you have any favorite zombie characters from cinema or from novels, let me know of those characters too. And there we have it, folks. Chibi Marvel Zombie She-Hulk. Thank you so much for joining me today. You want to find more out about me? You could go to my website, which is DYRPG.com, and I'm on Instagram at tom.dyrpg. If you like this video, subscribe. Thank you.